Well, hello, and you're welcome to this great time as we talk about something that came up on social media and everybody was like shocked. Africans were shocked at what they heard. It was a gentleman who came up to talk about recolonizing Africa. So, the first thing that came to my mind is like, are we going to have the ships come on our shores again and start packing people? Quite interesting topic. So it's to look at it, why recolonize Africa? What was he trying to say? What exactly did he mean by that? Is it coming from a school of thought of some people or just himself? Is this something that we should be afraid of? And what was the point he was trying to say in that discussion? But apart from that, we're looking at the definition of colonization and looking at it and asking questions like, has Africa really gained independence from its colonial masters, right? So we're going to talk about this and many more. But for now, we want you to please click the like and subscription button so that we can keep giving you insights into stuff like this, and you can actually encourage our channel. So please just click the button and then we can go on for today's topic.
All this talk of illegal migration in Europe, in the United States, it ultimately comes down to a contest of what is governance. Who is governed? Which countries are governed well? And if so many of these countries around the world are incapable of governing themselves, then it's time for us to just put the imperial hat back on to say, we're going to govern those countries if you're incapable of governing yourselves, because enough is enough. We're done being invaded.
Because our own national security risk is at stake.
Exactly.
National security interests are at stake.
You can say that about pretty much all of Africa. They're incapable of governing themselves and benefiting their citizens because the governments there are all about looting and pillaging and lining their pockets and going shopping in Paris instead of actually making their country better.
People on the left are going to watch this. They're going to say, wait a minute, Eric Prince is talking about being a colonialist again.
Absolutely. Yes. Enough. Because if you go to these countries and you see how they suffer under absolutely corrupt, made-up governments that are just criminal syndicates.
Made-up governments.
The people of Africa, the people of Latin America, a lot of them deserve better. Now, some countries are really getting it together. Look at what El Salvador did. Bukele, murder capital of Latin America, he said, no more. Now El Salvador is safer than Prince William County.
And he took
just
all
south of Washington, D.C.
You can see the interviewer just taken aback when he mentioned that. Very interesting. And you could see the confidence he has, saying it. It's something that doesn't really bother him. When you talk about colonization, recolonization of Africa, it's like, does he really know what he's saying? He's talking about bloodshed. Millions of people will die trying to resist that. People will die of hunger. There'll be war. There'll be all sorts of things going on. Are they going to use nuclear warfare? What exactly is he saying? What does he mean by that? It's quite annoying. So the question you ask is, who is Eric Prince? Dean Prince, born June 6, 1969, is an American businessman, former U.S. Navy SEAL officer, and the founder of the private military company Blackwater. He served as Blackwater's CEO until 2009 and as its chairman until it sold to a group of investors in 2010. So back to our topic, the recolonization of Africa. The first thing is to define what is colonization. What exactly does it mean? Well, according to the definition of colonization online, it states, as a noun, the action or process of settling among and establishing control over the indigenous people of an area. The control includes political, economic, cultural, and religious control. They, the colonial masters, determine what happens in all these areas. The definition of colonization is the action of appropriating a place or domain for one's own use. And the next question is Africa truly free from its colonial masters? Are we truly free? And remember, part of the definition of colonialism has to do with what? The economic aspect of things, the political aspect of things, of that community will be taken over by the colonial masters. Can we say that Africa is indeed free from the influence of its colonial masters in terms of government, leadership, the political system? Can we say Africa is truly detached, is independent enough to make its decisions apart from the influence of the colonial masters? Well, let's say the former colonial masters. Well, if they're former colonial masters, can we say that these ex-colonial masters are still colonial masters? And I think, to be honest with you, Africa is not free from its colonial masters. Africa is still being colonized. Whether we like it or not, that's what's going on. If you look at the economic system, IMF, the World Bank, lending to Africa and all that, you realize that somewhere along the line, we can't finish paying our debt. That's the honest truth. And everything that has to do with the economy, importation, exportation, there are regulations that are not really in favor, I think so, of a lot of development in Africa. Of course, there's money given out for development. There are projects out there for development. But because of that economic factor, Africa would always lag behind economically, because somewhere along the line, we're not even, I mean, the IMF, we're not really, we don't have a say much in terms of IMF. We don't have a say in terms of development when it has to do with the economic situation of Africa. The world is one that has the cash. In as much as Africa has the mineral deposits and the rest of them, the world has the money. The world is the one lending us the money. So how come, explain a continent that has huge resources in terms of natural resources, and it has a manpower, huge manpower as well. They are the ones who keep borrowing money from other regions that don't produce 1/4 what it produces. It's just amazing. This is 2024, and Africa does not have its own money, doesn't have its own economic power to determine a few things that happen globally. Yet it has the natural resources. So how does that work? What is he trying to say here? First and foremost, he has no regard for the leadership of Africa. He has no regard for the system that runs in the leadership of Africa, the government system. He has no regard for it. He just feels it's all corrupt. To a certain point, it's true. But the question I'll ask is, who is encouraging that corruption? Where do the African leaders keep their money? In some banks outside Africa. Where do they buy their mansions? Where do they spend their money? Outside Africa. So if the system outside Africa is actually encouraging corruption from Africa, what can the poor man and woman on the street do to stop that? It doesn't mean that the whole of Africa is corrupt for you to now say, oh, the leadership is corrupt. The leadership's corruption is actually driven by what it gets from outside. Speaking of colonization and speaking of influence, lifestyle, cultural, and the rest of them, I will say 80% of Africa is gone, is colonized. First and foremost, we don't speak our language as often as we should. Our generations, the next generations, are losing the African language. They speak more of the foreign languages than their own indigenous language. Not too smart, right? Now you tell me Africa has to take responsibility for its own decisions, which is very true, which is very, very true. But however, there's some influences also that are disturbing Africa from standing on its own independently. And the influences are things that we can't do without. For example, communication. Some time back, we wanted to make Swahili the language of Africa, and it wasn't working. And then when you go to most of the airports and the rest of them, we don't even have our own indigenous languages there, on the streets, on the street signs and the rest of them. Everything is English or French or Portuguese or Spanish. So it's difficult for Africa to stand on its own and claim that it has achieved independence from its colonial masters. Some of these things are unavoidable, while some other things were actually left behind as the colonial masters were leaving. They didn't want a case where they had lost total control of their colonies, so they still had some things that they could determine. The political aspect is one thing. The elections, I believe the colonial masters still determine who becomes the leader of a country. They determine it somehow. They're the ones who probably ask the different candidates and say, would you do X, Y, Z? Or would they have something on that person in case the person wants to speak against them? Do you understand? So the colonization of Africa is ongoing in a lot of ways. It's going to get worse. It's going to get worse. And there will come a time where a huge continent that has huge resources will not be able to make its own decisions, will not be able to choose its own leadership. And looking at the government style, we're all adopting democratic rule and not realizing that there's an element of democracy even within the indigenous African system. There's an element of socialism even within the indigenous African system. There's an element of federalism even within the indigenous African system. Not that we should look at everything Africa is bad and then you dump it. No, that's not true. Africa has its good side. And I think it's time for us to, listening to him talk about this thing, it's time for us to really wake up as Africans and take him on seriously on this. Make sure that we get our acts together in terms of government, in terms of educational system, in terms of the economic priorities of the country. It is time for Africa to wake up. Enough of us collecting monies to sponsor wars within Africa, in mining places, to mine places and to kill people in the name of terrorism, in the name of political movements. And then you're simply just the same thing that happened a century ago. We're still doing it today. We're still giving our minerals to people. We're still killing our brothers and sisters. Africa, you will need to wake up. Now, the last thing is it possible for them to recolonize Africa? Yes, it is possible for them to recolonize Africa because they have the military manpower. They have the economic manpower. If it's going to take 10 years to do so, they will do it. If it's going to take 50 years to do so, they will do it. They will take back Africa. You're telling me I'm not going to agree? That's not... Yes, you might fight, but your next generation might just look at the whole thing and say, well, you guys messed up in the first place. You don't have good leadership. So why didn't they just come over and take over? I bet you some Africans listening to this thing will like, yeah, they should come over and take... As far as I'm going to have 3 square meals, I'm going to have a place to put my head on. I'm going to have work to do and stuff like that. As far as I'm able to live a better life, why shouldn't they come and recolonize us? But what happened is that if you want to be recolonized, that means you've lost your dignity as a human being. That means you can't think. And that brings us back to that question of, are we superior? Are we inferior? Are they superior for them to now think of bringing colonization back? Do they feel they have the ability? The self-esteem is this so strong that they're thinking, we can come back anytime we want. Just watch us, we're going to come back. So these are the things that we have to look at as Africans and change the perspective for the better. Enough of us just complaining, oh, we've been oppressed, oh, we've been put down, blah, 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 blah. What is Africa doing? And what is Africa giving back to the world apart from natural minerals, apart from people dancing, blah, blah, blah. What else is it giving? Education, system, health, welfare, agriculture. We need to get into these things. Thanks a lot for being a part of today's topic, and I hope to see you next time. Take care. And don't forget to press the subscription button and like this video. Thank you.